react. You're whispering my name, thinking I won't be the same. Turn fiction into fact. See what you didn't know, bruises that I'll never show, slipping on your every jab. So tighten up your fist, step into the ring with this. I hope your mama's got your back. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. Just 'cause I took a break, you're making a huge mistake, thinking you can take the throne. Look at you trembling, step into the lion's den. Bet you wish you stayed at home. Begging for mercy underneath your breath when I ain't even sweating yet. My legend's written in the stone, yeah. You're crying Adrian, defeat is now your only friend. Even your mama's gotta know. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. First round, fifth round, final round. Oh, 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 yeah. First round, fifth round, final round. No, 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 no. First round, you thought you would've knocked me down. Fifth round, bleeding out the side of your mouth. Final round, holding the sound of my name in the crowd. You did a bust. Oh, 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 oh. You did a bust. Oh, oh, oh,
Hi, my name is Seth Andrews, and this is In Time.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone, to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. Thank you so much for joining us. So it's going to be a special show today. We're going to do a call-in show, so you can call in, talk to anyone on the panel. We had been hoping, of course, to have Starsky on. This is our regular Starsky time. He notified me this morning that he had other obligations, so we will not be seeing Starsky today, unfortunately. My suspicion is he will still be on the shills as scheduled for tomorrow, so you can pick him up there, and we'll certainly have him next week, and I think we'd like to do the call-in again next week. I am under no illusions that everybody here would love to call in and say hi to him. Lance is entering, myself, and Georgie are all here. In fact, let me bring all of these gentlemen out. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How you all doing?
Hey, everyone.
Great.
It's great.
Well, thank you so much, Georgie, for coming. And it was, like I said, I think having a couple of different people who talk about Ukraine on was a great idea. And again, it just so happened that Starsky wasn't able to make it, but I hope you can maybe join us next week again, and we're still doing the call-in show. So anybody who wants to call in, the number is pinned to the top. It is 484-2-IN-TIME. That is 484-246-8463, and we already actually have a caller, so we will get to that in just a minute. But excuse me. Before we do that, what I do want to do is figure out here. So, Lance, could you start us out with? Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me introduce Georgie. So, Georgie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel?
Sure. I'm Georgie. I'm covering in for Starsky. I'm kind of understanding of what's happening in Ukraine sometimes. Sometimes I'm not understanding, but I'm a YouTuber, kind of small. But people like me because I am very, very blunt, and sometimes I go on mad rages about certain topics, and then people relate to that. And then I'm also like a discount a microphone repairman. So sometimes I do really good job with my audio equipment, and then everyone makes memes of that. So basically I'm relatable, and I'm trying to run a channel where I explain what's happening in Ukraine in very, very simple terms for people that, let's just say there's a lot of experts that are having a lot of very, very complex discussions. I'm simplifying it to a normal person's level.
Well, I definitely think we need more of that. So I think that's great. We just also, Ali just dropped the link. So thank you for that to the channel. I'll make sure it also ends up in the description. It's not there yet. I was busy putting the number in and forgot to put in the links to the guests. So Commander McMillan is a frequent fixture here on In Time, and also here every Friday to help us with this. Commander, could you tell us briefly, give us your background, and then we'll figure out what's going on in Ukraine.
Sure. I'm a retired U.S. Navy officer. I went through the Naval War College and the U.S. Staff and Command College. I'm a certified, or was a certified Joint Staff Officer. So I worked with all different services, and my specialty was operational logistics. I was the guy who coordinated the inflow of all U.S. ground forces into Kuwait in preparation for the invasion of Iraq. So I'm also a student of history, and I am prepared to bore you to death with all sorts of trivia.
All right. Like I said, we do have somebody on the line waiting, and I do apologize. I'm going to have them wait just a little bit longer because I do want to just sort of start with what's been going on in Ukraine for the last week, just so that we have a little rundown on where Ukraine stands. So, Commander, if you don't mind telling us what's been going on in Ukraine.
Sure. On the ground, the Russians have, for all intents and purposes, it appears to have, they've taken Bakhmut itself. If there are Ukrainian forces still there, they're defending literally, and I'm not exaggerating, the last row of buildings on the edge of the city. So the Russians are effectively in control of the city, but it's not a city as we know it. It's just a pile of rubble. That which the Russians didn't destroy with artillery and missile fire, the Ukrainians deliberately blew up as Russian assault forces would enter the building. they detonate explosives and collapse the building on them. So there's literally very little standing. At the same time this is going on, the Ukrainians are making some interesting gains around the edges of the city. For those who've been following the news, the Russians had kind of started encircling the city to cut it off. There was only one secondary road left going into and out of the city for resupply, and it looked like it was going to become a disaster. The wings of that encirclement have already been driven back, so the front is kind of restored to a straight line-ish sort of affair. So there also, it appears the Ukrainians are making penetrations into the Russian lines on either side of the city. So they're kind of reversing the situation of what was going on there. Elsewhere around the country, the Russians continue to mount massive artillery barrages and such. So I'll stop there. I have to take this call. I'm sorry.
All right, no worries.
Sure,
No worries.
I can actually pick up.
Please.
This is nice because I actually have some news about what's happening there.
Mhm.
To put it simply, yes, I think Commander McMillan actually described it quite well on that the situation right inside the city. Ukraine has been doing quite successful pushes to push back the wings that were trying to encircle Bakhmut. And there are a couple of key heights that were like last heights that Russia needed to take to put the whole city in Operation Encirclement. Basically, once those heights were taken by the Russians, everyone said, that's it, Ukrainians should pull out. They didn't. They decided to pummel through. And now we know that Ukrainians have been able to retake some of those first important heights. So they have a good position to go forward. And in the south part, they were actually able to retake, or almost retake. The fights are still going on for the first major fortifying position right to the west of 𝐒𝐨𝐿, which is quite nice. What we're hearing so far is that Russians are pulling some of the troops from other directions, mostly 𝐒𝐸𝐿 and from some of the north, to help stabilize the situation, because they do not want to essentially get a Uno reverse card right after they capture Bakhmut. So they will still try to, okay, we got Bakhmut, we're going to stabilize it a bit. We're not going to allow Ukraine to just kind of recapture it. And to be honest, I don't really feel like a lot of people think that Ukraine now started this movement, but so far it's the movement of just deblocking themselves rather than putting Russians in dangers. So I don't really feel that people that are expecting that Bakhmut is now going to get re-encircled by Ukrainians is justified.
Yeah, but I think it's a possibility, as we were talking about earlier in the show. I think there's some parallels here to the situation in 1942 around Stalingrad. The Germans had driven into the city and for 4 months been literally fighting house to house. We're almost on the edge of getting to the Volga and driving the Russians across the river. And then in November, the Russians mount a massive counterattack on the flanks and encircle 250,000 men in the city. The potential for that exists. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but the strategic situation overall is kind of similar, because the Russians are pulling forces to stabilize the situation there, leaving the flanks weak, exposing that to that kind of a maneuver.
Absolutely, and the potential is there. We know Ukraine has a lot of force. Obviously, everyone has, and their dogs have been discussing that Ukraine is going to strike at the south, just because it's such a big, like an important strategic target. If you cut the the group in half, whatever they have at the south. It's a very, very significant change of the architecture of the battlefield. However, what I've also noticed that recently it was believed just today appeared that on the situation on Bakhmut was someone reported that they used drone strikes, and they thanked for the support some of the local territorial defense units and 47th Brigade. And 47th Brigade is one of the new assault brigades that were formed specifically for the offensive. So we definitely know that. So the fact that they were mentioned in the report, that means that some of their capabilities are being utilized already.
Yes.
So
it
sounds like
potential.
So it sounds like we have sort of general agreement that while things are heating up a bit, this is not the offensive that everybody has been waiting for. That has not yet begun. Is that sort of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think when the real offensive kicks off, everybody's going to know. It's going to be very obvious that's what's going on. These are local counterattacks to secure the situation.
Pretty much, yeah. But I think the more important things that happened this week actually happened outside of the battlefield. In a sense, like obviously they happened somewhere in Ukraine and around Ukraine. So, and there's so many to list. We can just start with, I think I have the note here on one of the most important ones, that this week Russia committed more war crimes than most of the democratic countries in the last 50 or 60 years combined. And that has been going on every week, pretty much. So just to remind to everyone, Russia is committing a lot of war crimes, and we should never kind of forget about that. So whenever people says like, "Oh my God, they actually strike some military targets inside Russia," shock.
It was an accident that the Russians struck military targets. They weren't intending to.
Yeah. But yes, obviously the biggest thing when we're talking about striking the targets is the delivery of the long-range missiles. Like that's a big game changer. It was one of the two capabilities that I believe General Ben Hodges was always advocating and saying that these are the two things that Ukraine need to retake essentially all of the land. Long-range strike capabilities, either ATACMS or Storm Shadow in this case. It doesn't matter really how, but just the capability. And second is some additional mobile air defense, so like fighter jets basically, that would allow to, if not dominate the sky, then at least negate the aerial advantage that Russia is having. So then the ground forces can actually do their job uninterrupted. So, and now we're hearing that long-range capabilities are there.
Yep.
So,
I think Storm Shadow is going to be, I won't say a game changer. I hate the way that word gets overused, but I think it will have a profound impact on what's going on. It allows the Ukrainian forces to target C3 nodes and logistics much deeper behind the lines. We've noticed as each successive longer range artillery slant missile system gets introduced, the Russians end up getting forced to relocate their logistics and command structures further and further and further from the front. And it makes it that much harder for them to resupply. It makes that much harder to keep control of the situation as it's developing. And I think, this is going to be a big thing. It's going to really make a difference.
Yeah, and talking about profound impact, there's something that has been profoundly impacted in Mariupol just recently, apparently at the airport. So there we go, as a confirmation of usefulness of these. But yeah, basically, as with all of the previous capabilities, we see that countries literally just need one of them to go forward, as UK have been doing before. It's doing it again. So now France is also said that they want to do their variant of Storm Shadow be delivered to Ukraine. So generally, the rhetoric around Ukraine having long-range capability has been overcome. It's an additional threshold that we overcame. I'm not sure why those thresholds exist. Maybe you can enlighten me, because most of the people were just baffled by why are we doing this still.
I think the greatest fear in the, I'll call it Western political circles, is that as the situation in Ukraine deteriorates, Putin is going to become more and more like that cornered rat who lashes out and does stupid things. And the introduction of each step of these longer range weapon systems, they fear is going to push him to the threshold of nuclear weapons release. I think that's why everybody's being so hesitant about introducing these things. And you'll notice as each one gets introduced, it's essentially adding 40 to 50 miles to the reach. So first we got the HIMARS system, and then we got that glide bomb that's launched by HIMARS. Now we have Storm Shadow. Assuming they follow through, the next step is ATACMS, which does, again, extend that reach another 50 miles. And at each stage, it's putting more and more pressure. You'll also notice, I think, and it's important to point this out, the caveat is that giving these weapons to Ukraine, they keep telling the Ukrainians you can't employ these weapons inside Russia proper. And it's, again, because of this fear of escalation, I think.
Sure, but we can easily, well, at least Putin can easily de-escalate the situation by getting out of Ukraine. So that option always exists.
Let's talk about
whenever
that.
we're saying that Putin,
Let's talk about that in 1 second. So I want to do a couple things. We did lose the call, so sorry we didn't get to that sooner. But that's, you can always call back. And anyone who wants to call and ask a question of anyone on this panel, 246-8463. That's 484-2 in time. You can give us a call and ask us a question. If you're in the live chat, tag In Time Show, and if we can get to the question, we absolutely will. We always get lots of good questions. A great way to make sure that we get it is Super Chat. The Super Chats just come right up to the control panel here, so I can see Super Chats right away, and we always do those first. All Super Chats are going to the charity of Starsky's choice. This is a Starsky show. We donate all of those to the charity of his choice. He chose the 𝐍𝐢𝐻𝐷 Volunteer Organization. So all Super Chats, the whatever we get from those Super Chats goes straight to the 𝐍𝐢𝐻𝐷 Volunteer Organization, which helps a number of units in Ukraine, including Starsky's unit. So it is actually essentially going really to help the effort, but it's also going directly to Starsky's unit. So it's a great way to help out, and we're doing that with all Super Chats. We've had one Super Chat. Yes, says Andering, it's the Swiss franc. Thank you. I would have forgotten. So, 5 Swiss francs from Yvonne Way. Thank you so much for that. And also a new member, Niels Adam, I want to say Adam. That's going to be. I'm going to go for that. So thank you so much for joining, and that's just another way to support the channel, and we really do appreciate it. So give us a call if you want to talk to anybody here on the panel. And in the meantime, so we're going to have on Tuesday, we're going to have, oh dear Lord, Lieutenant General Benjamin Hodges will be on Tuesday, and we'll be discussing all of these questions with him. He has been very vocal about we really need to give Ukraine weapons that can strike within Russia, and that this war is not going to end until they are, in fact, striking within Russia. So we're going to ask him about that and many other questions on Tuesday. He's the former head of ground, he was the former commander for all NATO ground forces. He was also the former U.S. commander for all U.S. troops in Europe. So we're very lucky to have him. We're delighted, and we're going to ask him those questions. So we were talking about the weapons that are being given to Ukraine. There was a thing about the F-16s that I want to talk about, but Commander, you had been mentioning about the concern of what happens if Putin is backed into a corner, and can he? What happens if he just sort of surrenders and says, "Oh, this was a mistake," and bails? Is that an option for him? What are his options, and what do you see happening going forward? Oh, you're muted.
I muted myself, sorry. I don't think it's an option for him. I think effectively, if he admits that this whole invasion was wrong, that it didn't work, that he has to pull out, the guy's dead within a week, or shift up into a gilded exile somewhere. He won't last, because there are a whole swarm of oligarchs around him who would not let that stand. It's a sign of weakness, and the whole Russian system is built on people looking strong. Even if they're weak, you have to appear strong. That is an admission of weakness, so he can't do it.
I disagree.
Oh,
I disagree. I think he can sell anything, because the machine, for me, the most kind of clearest thing that there is actually two main parts. First is the fact that Russian society and oligarchs and everyone else just ate up the loss of Kherson, because loss of Kherson was incredibly important for the whole campaign. It was incredibly important in also the significance, because it was the only regional center that was captured during this whole war. It's an extremely significant. And basically, as soon as the Russian troops left the left bank of Dnieper River, right bank of the Dnieper River, at that moment, that means that's it. Like, there is no more. Like, they will not get back. That's it. Like, there is no coming back to that. So and during that time, in the Russian population, Russian media, there was a little bit of a sadness, but generally speaking, they were celebrating how smart their generals were to save the lives of the troops and exit with little to no casualties, executing flawless maneuver to improve their positions. So that was
the spin must have made everybody dizzy.
Yeah. And the point is that the narratives were shifted so fast. The narratives completely disappeared. Kherson loss of Kherson made little to no waves in the Russian society. It was devastating for the campaign, but it means only one thing, that this can be done. This can be sold to Putin. If he really wants to come to some kind of negotiating table, like when we're talking about negotiations, essentially talking about how to sell for media, for public, the withdrawal from the full territory of Ukraine and start the program of payment of reparations and getting the war criminals set up for justice. When those negotiations actually start, I'm pretty sure Putin can not maybe order, that would not be right, but he can task the whole propaganda machine and campaign to sell it everything. And you've been telling about the oligarchs. Mm-hmm. So oligarchs in Russia are interested in one thing, like, so they want to come back. They want to just make money. They want to back. They don't need, like, they don't care if it's Putin in power, if it's not Putin in power. They don't have that. So if part of the negotiations will be that, okay, Putin gets out, war criminals, like I don't know, we find some war criminals that Putin is okay giving up, despite there is a warrant for his arrest. If that kind of negotiation starts, then at that moment, oligarchs say, oh, but some sanctions, for example, get lifted. And then oligarchs get, again, the flow of capital into their pockets. So in that way, he can both get to oligarchs. He still has enough his own firepower internally, like with 𝐍𝐲𝐜𝐻𝐸, with Kadyrov's forces that are not really military, they're police force, but it's the perfect police force to settle down any kind of potential local insurgency groups. So for me, there is a perfect potential way out to negotiate. And I believe that in that situation, those are the true negotiations with Ukraine as a strong position player. At least that's how I'm seeing it.
No, I see the validity of your argument, we'll put it that way. I think there are ambitious people around him that when they see him do something that dramatic, that shows he's weak, they will try their move. I agree. There's enormous internal security apparatus in Russia that can potentially quell any kind of uprising. But I think this will be something more in the lines of a palace uprising, and Russian history is full of that kind of thing.
The important part about my argument is that obviously it's not at the current stage, like it's not today or tomorrow. It's, for example, when Ukrainians are already isolated Crimea, like the Crimean bridge is out. Right. The troops in Crimea are trapped. The only ability for them to get is by the sea. At that moment, everything is falling apart. Basically the Crimea is going to be retaken in time, because in history doesn't know the war in which the assaulting party said we're going to take Crimea, and they did not take it. Crimea is a big trap. And so for that situation, when Putin is actually backed into the corner, because if he uses nukes, he's dead. That's it. Like, that's the end of his life. Like, he is just dead. And I'm pretty sure that message has been delivered to him quite clearly. So, and if you judge, okay, I'm dead on this side, or there is a potential for me to negotiate something. No. Yeah, Putin cannot be. I'm sorry. The comments here. Putin cannot be reasoned. Yes. Like, but that's not about reason. That's about exploiting his will to live.
Yeah, that's Putin's number one goal. Continue to live.
So basically, so it sounds like what we're talking about is, well, and this is sort of the problem, right? Which is he's not crazy. If he were crazy, that would be a whole, that would be a whole nother situation. But he is a psychopath. He was an assassin for the KGB, so I mean, he's literally killed people with his bare hands. He's ruthless. He doesn't care about the lives of Russians, let alone Ukrainians or anyone else. He does care about staying in power, and he cares about staying alive. It's been explained that NATO will enter if he deploys nuclear weapons. We believe chemical weapons were also included, but that has not been confirmed. But that's currently what we think has been explained to them, and so far they have abided by that. There's been some strikes in Russia. Do either of you gentlemen think that those are going to continue? How necessary do you think they are? And I mean, I know I find them gratifying, but my concern is that there are people who are more radical than Putin, and we've seen them. They've reared their heads up and said, hey, he's not, the reason we're having troubles in Ukraine is because he's not using chemical and nuclear weapons. It's because he's not being as brutal as he should be. Put me in power and see what happens. What's the likelihood of them seizing power if Putin missteps?
Can I start? So with regards to about strikes in Russia, I'm going to quote a recent classic, and I'm just going to say deeper and deeper. And it's going to continue, and it's going to go on, because that's the logic of the war that Putin started. That's the logic of the war that Russia started. You cannot just come into your neighbor country, kill a bunch of people, rape, torture, shoot some missiles, and then don't expect that something is going to fly back at you. That is not how wars work. And second, to think about is when we're talking to, can there be a more radical wing? In Russia, there is no procedure or to transition power. There is no. So if the race for power starts to the fact that there will be contenders taking for power, they are not going to come along. Like, it's never going to be like, oh, there's more radicals and then they're going to overthrow Putin and then no one's going to object and they will just submit. As soon as one party starts this, and it will be seen, as Commander McMillan correctly said, that there are a lot of very, very ambitious people there. Especially, we've known that a lot of these oligarchs has building their private armies. There's going to be a lot of internal troubles. And if we learned anything, before a country can project their desires outwards, they will need to solve whatever is happening internally. So at least this will not be reflected negatively in the context of Ukrainian war. Russia cannot fight internal war and also win or prolong Ukrainian war. That's not how it works, especially not after you decimate your whole regular army completely.
Yeah, I agree. I think if somebody does make their move against Putin, it essentially triggers a second Russian civil war. I don't see how that can be avoided. But, it's not something I think is likely to happen, but the potential is there. I think, the war is going to continue until Putin is out of the picture, is my personal feeling. But, yeah, he could decide to negotiate. I think it's somewhat unlikely. I don't think it's in the man's nature.
All right, we have two questions I want to get to here. So I'll put both up and you can answer them, gentlemen, in either order that you choose. But the first one was, what is NATO's readiness if he does cross the nuke line? That's the first question. The second question is, and we were talking about this earlier, so this one may be the easier one to answer first. Is there any truth behind the news that the U.S. has just approved F-16s to Ukraine? Let's start with
caveat.
Caveat. Yeah, we were discussing that earlier. Please.
Yeah. I think the way to look at it is, to answer the second question first, is that the U.S. has said it does not have objections to other people transferring F-16s to Ukraine. And we know, I think it's the Danes have already said that they're thinking of doing so.
But we also know that the U.S. has been training their pilots. Has been so we may not provide them with F-16s, but my understanding is that we've been training. We've actually taken Ukrainian pilots out of, presumably, this hasn't been confirmed, but we believe that we've been taking Ukrainian pilots, a bunch of whom just ended up going missing, and we've been training them on F-16s. Is that accurate, or was that someone else, or am I misremembering that?
I know that Ukrainian pilots have been cycling out of operations and being trained in a number of different countries. Arizona was nice in the spring. Now it's getting hot, so they probably decided they want to train somewhere else. But it's a question of sourcing the stuff. But the other part of that is that just landing the airplanes in Ukraine and saying, okay, boys, take them away. Yep, you've already trained up on them, doesn't address the basic issues, which is that there's an entire substrate of logistics that need to be in place in order to operate a new model of aircraft. Even if they somehow got a bunch of, I don't know, I'm pulling this out of the air, but let's say MiG-31s or something, which they don't have. It, again, requires an entire logistical infrastructure. And since you're transitioning an Air Force from ex-Soviet standards to current NATO standards, that transition is even bigger. But you literally can't put gas in the plane because the fittings that they use for refueling a Russian-made aircraft are different from the ones they use for refueling NATO standard aircraft. That's the kind of hurdle you're looking at. So even if F-16s were to arrive in Ukraine today, you probably won't see them operating for a minimum of another 6 months, probably longer.
Georgie?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, because we know that Ukrainian pilots were the assessment, but from everything that I've heard, it's not the pilots that are the bottleneck. Like Ukrainian pilots, when you said taking pilots off the cycle, it's not completely true, because Ukraine air fleet is very small, and they have about 3-to-1 pilot to aircraft ratios. So they have spare pilots that they can essentially spare to any kind of training. And the biggest problem of getting any kind of planes is that it's a whole new world, basically. It's one of the, like, to have an air force is extremely taxing on your logistics, and for Ukraine, especially, that was one of the arguments where they said, like, okay, F-16s, we're going to go with F-16s. Why? Simpler logistics, just because there's so many potential countries that can donate them or spare parts or whatever else. And if we again get like a whole zoo of different models of airplanes, then it's just going to completely throw the whole already strained logistics that Ukraine has, because there is already a whole zoo of different armored vehicles, artillery pieces, and everything else. And obviously the countries around help a lot, but it's still a big problem. And therefore, if it's decided on just one plane, one of the most, if not the most popular plane in the world, then that's a good choice. Maybe it's not the best, yes, and it could take time to set up those logistics, yes. Then that would take a while for that, for sure. And the problem is that I think when we're talking pilots, it's not the pilots that people are asking of. I think the training and open training of pilots is an indicator of commitment. So I believe what people are actually asking is, do we have countries with an open commitment to deliver planes? And with that, I want to point people's attentions to the delivery of Storm Shadow missiles that just recently happened. The statement that Storm Shadow missiles will be delivered to Ukraine happened basically the same day they got delivered, and then next day we already had the first strike by them. So potentially things are happening, but we need to understand that not everything is open to the public. So we can look at indicators, but nothing is open so far. But it's great to see that there is a discussion about this, and with Denmark and everything, so we can finally see indicators of commitment, which is, I believe, what people are looking for.
Absolutely.
Well, so many countries.
I think the worst job to have in the Ukrainian military right now is supply searching.
So if so many countries are committed to helping, why not say just, could they use Poland for, fueling and whatnot for these F-16s and use Ukrainian pilots?
Ooh, that opens
very thin line.
Real can of worms. It's the same situation we were in during Korea, where you had MiG aircraft operating out of China, which we couldn't strike because it was in China, because going into China escalates. Would the Russians feel the same limitation? Would they just say, hell, they're attacking us out of Polish bases, we're going to attack Poland? Bingo, Article 5.
Well, and that's it too, right? You couldn't just be using the logistics, because it's not like the plane is going to take off from Ukraine, land in Poland, refuel, go back to Ukraine, land, and then take off and attack from Ukraine. Any attacks or combat would have to come from Poland. So they're gonna right? That would essentially, so that's a lot more than just supplying weapons and saying, here, you guys, we're just giving you the weapons, what you do with them, but actually allowing them to stage and take off from and attack from Poland is a whole nother thing. Is that roughly accurate?
Well, I pulled the trigger and the gun was pointed at the man, but it was the bullet's choice of where it was going to go.
Yeah. And I believe there was also a second part of the question that regarded the nukes, and it's also a good transition to what I have in my notes, because we saw this week the nuclear wet dreams of wannabe dictator Putin completely collapsing, because apparently their ultra technologious, amazing hypersonic missiles turned out are actually just a lot of hot air. Let's put it this way. And we
Smoke
saw
and mirrors,
that,
baby. Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you believe Russia, that obviously there are people that believe Russian MOD, which is a whole another can of worms, but very funny one though. When Russian MOD states that Ukraine said that we struck Kyiv with 6 missiles, that is untrue, because that's not the number of missiles that we launched. And then the next day they said, oh, we actually launched 6 missiles, but all those 6 missiles destroyed 5 parts of the Patriot battery system altogether. And then it turns out that like the assessment was made, and it was just like some paint essentially scraped on the Patriot system that is now fully operational. They even took it offline, the damaged air system. So, but the point is that 𝐒𝐚𝐬, the hypersonic modern weapons, like apparently US that has immense research budget, just couldn't overcome hypersonic problems with the hypersonic weapons, but Russia, on a basically like a good startup, they just knocked it out of the park. Well, it turns out completely not, because the problem is that 𝐒𝐚𝐬 was the missile that was supposed to be uninterceptable, and it was supposed to deliver the threat of the tactical nuclear weapons to the whole of Europe, saying you cannot catch this, like you cannot intercept this. Right. And in one night, Ukraine, by using quite modern PAC-3 Patriot, it's an upgraded Patriot system essentially, and they were able to intercept it with just one battery. And they don't even have like the most up-to-date like radar systems that are just so classified in Europe. They're just up there. So the point is that whatever Russia thought about threatening nuclear to Europe, right now, I would feel pretty stressed about their desires, because as soon as your big stick turns into a feather, well.
Yeah, but with nukes, all it takes is one. That's the problem.
Let's just a reminder for anybody who wants to call in, ask the panel a question, and join us on the stream here. The number is 484-246-8463. That's 484-2 in time. Give us a call, and you can join us on the stream here. But okay, let's say for a second that Putin does cross that line. We know. It's been confirmed that NATO has, through back channels, told him that NATO will engage if he deploys a tactical nuclear warhead. Let's assume that he decides to deploy one, Bakhmut, some other area, the small-scale tactical nuclear weapon. Word gets, we find out that he has deployed one. What is? Well, you know what? Let's Yeah, I'll give you just 1 minute on that, and then we do have a call, and we'll go to that call, and then we'll finish. But Commander, just let's start with you. What happens?
We don't know what the NATO response is going to be. That card has been held very, very close to the chest. But in my opinion, even if it's something as subtle as just declaring a no-fly zone, that will have a profound effect on what's going on at the front. So the real question is how many people need to die in the giant mushroom cloud to get that intervention, and I shudder at that outcome.
I do also want to hear from Georgie on that, but before we do, we have Chicago, Illinois on the line. Chicago, how are you?
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
First of all, thank you very much for your show.
Thank you.
Starsky, Slava Ukraini.
German.
Colonel, thank you. Colonel, thank you very much for your kind words to our boys in the front line. And thank you for the host to have great people on your show. I've been watching your show because I'm from there. I'm from Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And the boys, Ukrainian boys, know how to fight. The problem is political people who don't really care. They've never been to Ukraine themselves. Been to Ukraine, been to the war zone or close to the war zone. They understand, like Operation Starsky and other boys and girls who protect their own land. Not only they protect their land, but protect other countries. Protect even Poland. Thank Poland for helping Ukraine or whatever they can supply. Whatever they have in supplies, yes, they should send everything what they have. Why they keep it on the somewhere in Arizona or whatever they keep it those planes? Those planes need to be in Ukraine. Colonel, if you have connections with someone that you been there, someone you served, maybe you have a connection, maybe you can help them, the Ukraine, send those planes. The planes are there. There's already on the bases. They've never been used after they used been, What do you think about that, Colonel?
Go ahead, Nick.
No, well, I was going to say, although I think it went without saying that, of course, he was speaking to you, Commander. And that, yeah. So please,
Lieutenant Colonel and Commander are equivalent rank structure, so it doesn't matter.
I'm showing my ignorance.
So, yeah, in my opinion, the issue is that even if we can't exert direct influence by, calling somebody big, doing shows like this brings the information to the public so that they can put pressure on their elected officials to get the government off its ass and give Ukraine the support it needs to end this damn insanity. That, I think, is critical. It's nice that we watch shows and we stay informed, but if you're not on the phone once a week or sending an email once a week to your elected officials saying, why aren't we doing X, in this case F-16s, whatever, you're pissing in the wind. It's not accomplishing anything. You need to start exerting that pressure to make things happen. That's how the system responds in this country.
All right, well, thank you, caller, very much for calling in. But yeah, the caller brought up a very good point, and I want to ask this. This is an important question. We will get back to the NATO question in just a minute, but the caller brought up a question that I think is worth getting into, and then we do have another caller that we'll get to in a minute. But I want to start with Georgie. Why is this important? There are wars going on, all over the world throughout at any given time. Here we are talking about Ukraine. What makes this different, and why is this important? Why should Americans, be putting their tax dollars into it? Why should they care? What's the deal?
Well, tax dollars is a little bit of a stretch because this is benefiting America immensely in many profound ways. Like I know some people like to say, "Oh, there is a number, and then that number is being sent to Ukraine," but that's not how it works. Firstly, a lot of the older American stocks are being sent to Ukraine. So when people say, "Oh, but the stocks needs to be resupplied," cool. But who are people that are working on making sure the stock? It's American production, right? It's not that it's a goods from China that are going to get imported. No, there's a jobs and production for US. It's going to help Ukraine. Obviously, it's going to help Ukraine, but it's going to help U.S. economy. So, plus beyond that, a lot of the things that are being sent, this allows U.S. to have, because, for example, artillery shells, something like artillery shells. Oh, we're sending so much artillery shells. Yes, but artillery shells have stock life. So artillery shells that are already running out of their stock life are now, they don't need to be disposed of because they are serving a bigger purpose. And that's kind of the economics question. So there is a lot of benefits that U.S. is getting by just helping Ukraine.
Let me interrupt real quick. Let me interrupt real quick. So when we say we sent $1 billion worth of equipment to Ukraine, especially early on. That wasn't modern equipment, and we weren't buying that equipment and then sending it over. That was equipment that we had to maintain, that we had to store, and we were paying for, and that's just it on paper. And I think, Lance, were you going to add something? Or
yeah, there is a whole subtle behind the curtain game that's going on right now. You'll notice, for example, that the U.S. kept saying, we're not going to give M1s, we're not going to give M1s, we're not going to give M1s. And then somebody, I can't remember, I don't think it was Germany, but one of the European countries said, okay, we're going to give them Leopard 2s. And suddenly the U.S., whoa, we have M1s too. The competition that's going on in that regard, behind this curtain I'm talking about, is between different defense industry companies of who gets to get their equipment into Ukraine in bulk, because we know at the end of the war, the Ukrainians are going to have to maintain their forces. Whoever gets the most stuff there then becomes the provider for that army, and it's a very profitable business. War is profit for the defense industries. And that's a lot of what's going on. So when you get a country like, say, France, who recently announced that they were training Ukrainian pilots on the Mirage, almost within 48 hours, you get all this talk about, oh, yeah, the F-16's coming to Ukraine. Oh, this is great. It's a really callous, blood for money kind of game that's being played behind that screen, and it has a profound influence on who gets to supply what.
So I want to have Georgie finish real quick, and then we're going to bring in Montana. So from Columbus, Ohio, we're going to bring that. But Georgie, why don't you, because I did cut you off, I just wanted to clarify on that, because I think you brought up an excellent point. And so you were also saying about the funding. Yeah.
Yeah, I will quickly finish the points so we can get to the caller. The second point I wanted to make is the argument that people are saying, well, if I remember correctly, during, for example, Trump times, that there was a requirement that European allies do more. Well, this war already has immensely benefited also U.S., that European allies or NATO allies, NATO has expanded. NATO has been rejuvenated. Oh my God, that's great. And more importantly, the countries that are inside of NATO finally are like, wake up. And so wasn't that kind of good for the NATO? So good for the NATO, that means more defense for US, more self-sustaining defense for Europeans. So US will be less burdened to provide. And Korea. Yeah, we also saw the political benefits of this war, as now both Europe, US, and also parts of countries in the Pacific region are now coming together even stronger than ever before. We have unprecedented collaboration. So the point of this is that Putin fundamentally threatened the world order. Yeah. So the short answer, without going into long, is our position, our benefits, our privileges, our way of life, the safety of us, the safety of our children, our grandchildren, and everything that we know is dependent on the fact that we are staying together and strong. If we give up on Ukraine, that we've committed already so much, then we just stop. Then we lose any kind of trust, not only in between Ukraine, we start losing trust in between each other. And all of these benefits, both economic, cultural, just defensive, and so on, are just going to be gone. Why? Ukraine is already winning. Like, just finish the job. Like, that, nothing else is required.
Yeah, if there's one thing this war has done, it has made everybody, not just in NATO, but in the collective West, which, let's be honest, includes a lot of Eastern countries too. But it's made people aware that collective security is the way to go, because you are so much more powerful than an aggressor state when you're in that kind of arrangement. I mean, take the Baltic states as a perfect example. They disappear from the map, overnight if the Russians wanted to do something, absent the collective security or protection afforded by NATO.
Right, we're gonna expand on that in just a minute. We did lose the call, but you can call back, and if we get somebody in the next minute or so, we'll bring them on. If
Okay.
not, we'll
Nick, you need
yes.
to just interrupt us and say, "Shut up! I've got to."
I should be a little more.
Hey.
Well,
Yeah.
I will do a little more of that. All right. But we did get big gay sexy balls for 10 euros. Well, and he's sitting there going like, "Say my name, say my name." I was like, "Have you met my head mod? I mean, come on, Titan Uranus. I give me a break." What can I say? We have like some of the most juvenile. I'm sorry, am I calling our audience juvenile? No, I mean you're all the smartest, brightest, best. Yeah. I shouldn't do that because now I am literally tempting fate. Somebody's just going to get a completely new name and like, oh yeah, Nick, say this one. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut. If somebody comes up with a truly like just a name that I can't utter, we will have a temporary new senior host. It will be Commander Lance McMillan, and for a 30-second period, he will be hosting the show, and he'll have to deal with the super chats. But thank you very much for that, and we appreciate that. And that, along with all super chats, will be going to the Vatra Volunteer Organization as per Starsky's request. So. Everything on all these shows gets donated. That's, I think, sort of the least we can do. CF Beauty also became a member. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. So good to have you on board, and appreciate that. So, Starsky we don't have Starsky right now, unfortunately. He let me know earlier today that he's got other obligations. It's gonna happen given
Wink,
where
wink,
he is.
nudge, nudge.
Yeah, we're gonna have him next week, but in the meantime, I fully expect that he's going to be on the shills tomorrow. So, and now I just dropped the link to the shills, so he should be on tomorrow with them, and we'll have him on next week, and we're just going to continue to do the these every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. He's on most of the time. This is actually our 31st show, and I think he's missed 2 or 3 total, but it's our 31st show with Starsky. We love having him on, and I think that this is important. So I think, and this is something I do want to talk. The U.S. is more isolationist than most countries, and I think part of that is largely based on our geography. We only have 2 countries adjacent to us. And English is one of the official languages of one of those countries. So we don't think in terms of having to live with the rest of the world. We also have the world reserve currency, which allows us to leverage the rest of the world to sort of think and act the way we do. English is the language of business. It's, for the most part, the language of science as well. So this allows Americans to sort of live in a much more insular way. And so a lot of Americans really do sit there and say, oh, gee, why should the problems of another country be ours? In Europe, you can't really think that way because they're so interconnected. So, Lance, when Americans come up to you and say, well, why is what happens in Europe the U.S.'s problem? What do you say?
That's a hard one. I will use the current conflict in Ukraine as an example. I would argue effectively it is a proxy war. It is the war that the Soviet Union and the U.S. Never actually fought. It's being fought for different reasons, but that tension was always there, and as we know, is still there today. And I hate to, as I've said this on the show several times before, I hate to put it in these terms, but it's a case of if Ukrainian boys and girls are not dying on those front lines, very likely in a very short time, it's American boys and girls who will be dying on a very different front line. That's why. it's important to continue to support Ukraine fully. And the more we support them, the faster this will be over, the faster things can return to normalcy. The economy of the world can stabilize because it's been hugely disrupted by what's going on. That's why I think it's important to continue doing what we're doing and expand that support.
I hate the fact that I feel like I'm becoming my parents, and that I'm sitting there saying, like, well, you don't understand the history, and you don't the Soviet Union either is not really dead, or you can look at it perhaps in a more realistic way, which was there never was a Soviet Union. It was just Russia. I mean, Russia was the primary country in the Soviet Union. What 6 of one, half
Russia
a dozen
with
of the
red
other.
underwear as opposed to white underwear. What's the difference?
Yeah.
I think I would have to disagree, because
please.
Soviet Union, we can say politically, generally, yes, it was like the Russian narrative that driven it, but the Soviet Union existed as an enclosed economic and production cycle system. So Soviet Union could sustain itself without relying on anyone else. Mm-hmm. So that is what kind of defines Soviet Union, like just how much military power and so on and economic power it had. It's a very debatable question, like a lot of historians, and I'm not a historian and I never was. But the point is, Russia is not Soviet Union. Russia that cannot sustain itself, and we've seen this profoundly. Like right now, just recently, the question was like, how is Russia still being able to produce like T-90 tanks? How is Russia still being able to produce missiles right now? Because apparently it was foreign components. And now we find out from recent articles that just came out on different media that apparently just European companies were trading with Russia, except they were doing it by the dumbest way possible, by changing the destination country. So the contracts like that went to Russia before the war started, the companies just said, okay, it goes to the company in Kazakhstan through Russia and just gets lost on the way. And that's it. And that's how a lot of these components made to Russia in pretty much uninterrupted flow. So what we've been exposed by this conflict is that we've put a lot of dependency into Russia, and a lot of that assessment was done maybe in a retrospect of thinking of Soviet Union being strong, can sustain itself, and we're just additioning to it. But the fact is, Russia is utterly dependent on everyone around it, and it cannot sustain itself. That's what distinguishes it. It's completely.
The interwoven world economy.
Well, I certainly agree that it can't in the same way that the Soviet Union did. I do think it has a bare level of subsistence that it can accomplish, and so far has been able to. But that's one reason why I think it also is necessarily going after former Soviet satellite states. But in my view, at least in terms of trying to talk to Americans about this, the mindset of modern Russia is, in my view, reasonably similar to the mindset of the Soviet Union, which was reasonably similar to the mindset of Russians going back probably at least 300 years. So in my view, while this Russia is economically nothing like the Soviet Union, and is certainly not capable of starting a Cold War with the United States, and can't really sustain itself, the thinking culture and the way it proceeds throughout the world is, in my view, very similar to, in fact, almost indistinguishable from the former Soviet Union. And the reason I think that's important is because I think that's what people need to realize. It's what you had said earlier, Georgie, which is it's actually, I really hate to say this because I think this is how you get good people to do bad things, is start talking about high-flown ideals and not specifics. But I do think that this is a battle of how the Russians think you run a country and how Western democracies think you run a country. And I think that's what it was in the Soviet Union. And I think that battle is absolutely the same here. They're much diminished, but that's what this is about. Is that, do you think, fair?
To an extent, I would have to disagree potentially in between the thinking. It's because we think about Russia in very often very simplistic terms, especially when people start believing in a lot of Russian propaganda that current Russia, modern Russia, is a direct lineage through all of the history, that it's always been Russia. It's just at one time it was the Russian Empire, then at another time it was the Soviet Union, and now it's the Russian Federation. But those three entities and even the whole history is completely different from another. Russia that was the Muscovy under the Mongols was profoundly different from the Muscovy that was during the Slavic times, and so on. And with regards to thinking, I was kind of in the same boat for a lot of times, but I started listening to a very nice philosopher on YouTube called Vlad Vexler. He's a Russian himself, but living in Britain for a while now. And Vlad goes very deep, and he actually even made like a whole expose. I couldn't name what was the name of the video, but he discussed very profoundly the differences between what mentality and what is expected of a population within the Soviet Union and within the Russian Federation. I wouldn't want to go in depth because I don't have a PhD in psychology, and I might not understand. But roughly speaking, what was he alluded to is that during the Soviet times, there was a positive drive to a specific ideological vision, whereas current Russia more focuses on individual authority and just individual projection of power over the others. So essentially like a more of a tribal or like even like a feudal society, one might say. So that's the differences in a perceptive of taking. But again, I would much rather maybe you have Vlad Vexler on at some point and ask him that.
I would be delighted. Speaking of also, as we said, we're going to have on Lieutenant General Ben Hodges will be on this coming Tuesday, and we're going to be asking him a lot of questions. He was the former head of NATO ground forces, and he was also the former head of all U.S. forces in Europe. We're going to have him on to discuss this. And a week from that, we're going to have on Rick the Ukrainian, who just joined us in the live chat. Очень приятно, Rick. Спасибо большое. Очень приятно. Rick is going to be.
You should
on,
say дякую.
Это что это Ukrainian язык? Я учил русский язык в школе, извините. Я забыл много, ну, может говорить немного, если должен разговаривать. Но я знаю, it's like I know it can be offensive. It should be offensive to speak Russian to a Ukrainian.
No, it's not.
The best I've got.
It's not. It's totally normal. Like the language was never a problem in Ukraine and never is, and obviously there is a lot of drive to now expel a lot of Russian stuff, but I think overall, I mean, even if you watch like videos from the front lines, it's the same as always. It's 50-50. There's like half of the troops that are fighting for Ukraine that are speaking Russian only. And that doesn't mean, like, the fact that they're same in language doesn't mean that they're same in the head. So it just shows the difference is not the language. It never was. And more importantly, and this actually brings the question that Nick, I believe we touched upon, that Russia and Putin has no claim on the history and culture that we actually, when we met up on the shills. So the fact that Putin is using a lot of this Russian history, Russian culture, and so on to drive his propaganda narratives.
Let me interrupt real quick. I do want to catch you on that, but the reason I just wanted to, so I wanted to finish with so Rick is now here. He will be on a week from Ben Hodges. So we will have Rick on. He does the dubbing of the POW interviews, and I think that's very important, and I'll explain how and why, but he's in the live chat right now, and I just wanted to, while he's here, good to see you, and I look forward to, we're going to have him on a week from this Tuesday. So you were saying Russia does not, Putin has not cornered the market on Russian culture, or at least the history of that's yes, please continue.
Correct. And just to kind of finish it off, basically, I always ask, like, Putin says, Russia, Russian culture, Russian this, Russian that. The question is, what has Putin's Russia contributed to the culture of Russia, to the to the state of Russia, because a lot of what, when we're referring to the Russian culture, this kind of flows from the previous conversation that we just had, that the entities of Russia, the Soviet Union, the Russian Empire, it's just a propaganda narrative built by Putin that it's the same entity. They have nothing to do. They're profoundly different, and kind of looping it back into the culture and mentality, that current mentality and current Russians, they are bastard. Well, not the Russians, but the Russian machine, the current representation of a Russian culture is the bastardized version of whatever was happening before. Right now, they are promoting that if you listen to Russian culture music, then you must support this war. That's how they're putting it. That's what they're expecting.
Well, and someone in the live chat just said that they disagree, and they explained why. And that's the sentiment that I most get, which is, and we've seen, they've been, if anything that's sort of has Russian history to it has gotten damaged in the war, they're like, yeah, we're not going to repair that. We're not going to fix that. And there is something to be said for, I certainly understand the sentiment of trying to scrub everything Russian from Ukraine culture, given what. The absolute atrocities, and atrocities at this point doesn't even seem to cut it when you take a look at what we've covered and what they've been doing. You certainly understand that. Starsky's always nice every time, every time we bump into each other, and every time I see him, we speak Russian a little bit, which is great. My Russian has diminished dramatically because nobody in the U.S. speaks it, so I don't get much of a chance to practice it. And I lost my Japanese a long time ago for that reason. My Spanish is still all right, but it was, I still always have this tinge of, should I really be speaking Russian to a Ukrainian? But so far, they've all been very polite about it, which I appreciate. And I think you brought up. Can I
quickly make a point, just super quickly? Please. It's because I don't want to be misunderstood on this point. It's very, very important, very sensitive. I think the Russification of Ukraine is great. I think it's good that Ukraine returns to its cultural roots, and the language flourishes and becomes the language of Ukraine. When I was referring that the Russian is still profound in Ukraine, is that just the constatation of fact. It's not the fact that it should be this way. It's that it is the current situation. It would be very nice if it would be Ukraine would recognize its nice and past culture and so on, but it doesn't mean that it's not like this. The best example is the Azov regiment, supposedly super Nazis that hate everything Russian. Well, most of them are actually Russian speakers. And that's something that people don't know.
Thank you for that. All right, so we've got 45 DKK, is that Danish kroner? Slava Ukraine from Denmark. F-16s on the way, I think. That's what we're hearing. That's what we're hearing. So what I'd like to do is, I think, would like to start to wrap this up. So I think I'm actually going to close the call-in line. Oh, Amy Newman is here. Welcome, Amy. Good to see you. We're gonna close that up, but I also want to make sure that each of you gentlemen have a minute to or a couple minutes to say we're not leaving in like 10 seconds. We've got some time, but and I want to remind people. So yeah, on Tuesday, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of all NATO ground forces and former commander of all U.S. forces in Europe, will be on. He will be discussing with us Ukraine. We've talked a little bit about what we expect him to say, but we're going to have, I think, a very good conversation with him. Lance will be there. Zandring will be there. I am really looking forward to that. And then a week from that, on the 30th, we're going to have Rick from Ukraine. He's been dubbing interviews with Russian POWs in Ukraine, and what I think is important about that, I'm tempted to just not say anything because I want to ask him, and I want to ask him without him having heard what I think. But I think I've listened. I think he's going to give me his opinion. I don't think my opinion is going to influence him. But what we've talked. Well, Nick. Don't put poisoning the well. We've heard so many voices in this war, and anyone who is a POW from anybody, you're not going to slander the country that's holding you captive. So, they're not going to sit there and say terrible things about Ukraine while they're in the custody of Ukraine. But having said that, we haven't heard much about what they say going in. One of the things that shocked me the most was when we were talking to Starsky, and we were talking about what happened when his unit got captured in, oh dear Lord, I can't believe I've forgotten. It was the very first battle. It was that airport, and I've forgotten. But when they when they came back, said, okay, what'd they ask you? What'd they talk to you about? They asked, why are you shooting at us? That's what the Russians asked the Ukrainians when they captured. Why are you shooting at us? Well, maybe because you invaded our country. That's what they asked. And we've heard so much about the propaganda. We know roughly what they're saying, but it's like, okay, do we hear that from the soldiers? Do we hear that? What do we hear from the soldiers when they call their mothers, when they call their spouses? What happens there? And for Americans, it's very hard to hear that because none of that's in English. And here is somebody who has been taking the time to dub that so that we can hear what I think is a very important voice. There are other victims to this, and it's in many cases the Russians as well. When you hear about somebody who said, yeah, there was a knock on my door, and I answered, and they said, you're going to war and you're going to go to the front lines. I said, no, I'm not. I said, oh, well, that's funny because, it turns out you owe all this money in taxes. And so you're either going to do hard labor in Siberia or you're going to go to the front lines. And everything he's heard is that, oh, the front lines are a piece of cake. They're welcoming us with flowers. And so he goes there. And now what's happened? So I think that's something we haven't heard. I think that's also an important part of it. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be on the 30th. And we'll hear his take on what he's done. He does the dubbing. He doesn't do the interviews. There's confusion about that, but he's clearly thinks they're important. We're going to figure out why, and we're going to see what he's learned in doing this. So that's going to be great on the 30th. So, gentlemen, let's start with Georgie. Any thoughts? Anything that we missed? We were covering, I know, the F-16s, and we bounced around a bit, but I want to make sure that we sort of circle back and catch anything before we go.
Well, I mean, there are a couple of topics that are up my alley that are a little bit comedic, like Russia making clowns of themselves at the League of Nations 2.0 by asking everyone, can you please stop supplying the anti-air weapons to Ukraine because they are violating the right of our missiles to fly into Ukraine. That was kind of the big comedic relief that I had here. But generally speaking, the important part is obviously that Zelensky is going to the Arab League, I believe it was called. I'm sorry if I'm getting it wrong. And no, but before that,
okay.
Before that, he also went to the Middle East. And I haven't watched the speech yet, so I don't know how it was taken. But I've heard that he was quite sharp on some of the nations that were not supporting Ukraine from the get-go, and said that there is still chance to do it. So we'll see. But basically this week was defined by politics. I will hope that coming weeks will be defined by Russians retreating towards the well-defined borders by the League of Nations 2.0 that they just appealed to.
Well, I hope we can have you back. Yeah, I like that. I hope you'll come back next week as well, and we can do another call-in show. And people are a little unused to the format too, I think so. And I'll try to be a little quicker on. The reason we have you gentlemen on is because you know what you're talking about, and you provide insight, but also areas to discuss where we can sit down and try to break up what we're hearing, and then also hopefully give our audience some context for everything that's going on. So it rubs me the wrong way to interrupt when somebody's telling us something that I think is valuable, but we'll get it sorted. Sometimes callers are going to have to wait, and it does happen. I apologize. I know it's not getting your Starbucks latte in 30 seconds, but not to be dismissive, but it's I think we're lucky to have both of you on here. So thank you for that, and I hope you'll come back next week. Commander, what are your any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yes, I know everything, and what I don't know, I just make up.
That's our motto. That's you'll see that right under the thing as the headlines are going.
I know everybody's kind of disappointed when we hold these shows and, ooh, tell us all the exciting things that are happening. And you talk about, diplomats meeting and deals being brokered, and, they want to see big, bold arrows moving on maps and pictures of explosions and things. As bizarre as it sounds to say it, what happens on the front lines is nowhere near as important as what's happening on those other scenes, because those are what decide how and what happens on the front lines. So that's what we're waiting on right now, is to all the ports to be in place, for the ground to have firmed up enough. And once all that happens, then you're going to get the drama. But I think a lot of people forget it's not Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan. These are real people fighting a real war, and they're dying, and we need to get that damn madness to stop so these people aren't dying anymore. That is the fundamental fact of what's going on.
Georgie, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I'm just saying that Commander is completely right, because this is exactly what the caller has been asking, right? He's hearing from the guys in the front line, and what the guys at the front line ask. Can you please reach out to bigwigs so they can make decisions, so it's easier for us here? So, just to kind of underscore the point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the best. You make the best decisions when you have the most information, and there's plenty of information that's coming in now. It isn't a big, and we've had those. I mean, we've had the shows. We show the map, and then we show what's happening on the front lines, and we cover, and we've covered. I remember when you and I, Commander, first covered the deliberate targeting of civilians, and we were trying to wrap our heads around that, and it's just one of those things. You can't make informed decisions about what you're going to do in the world and who you're going to support and how you're going to do it. You're not going to have a voice. Well, you can have a voice. It's just not going to be productive if you don't have the knowledge to go with it. So that's what we sort of try to provide here. And I think the two of you have been very helpful in that. So thank you both. So, as a reminder too, if you like the show, like, subscribe, share. If you share our content, that's a great way. If you know somebody who's going to be interested in it, share it. It really helps us out. It helps out the people who like our content. So it's good for everybody. Like, subscribe, that helps us out in the algorithm. And, as we're trying to grow the channel, that's always a big help. Become a member, patron. Those are other ways to support it. We appreciate all of you who've been, watching, liking, subscribing, and sharing. It really helps us out. We have a Discord. Come on in. We talk about this on the Discord. The Commander is on our Discord and is great about answering questions and engaging with people and talking to them. So come on in and see what we do. And we cover, this is an educational program. We're not a Ukraine channel. We cover the Ukraine right now because it's important. Because we believe very strongly that it's important, and because it's a serious humanitarian issue as well, aside from political geopolitics, and it's a crazy situation. And also, I will say this, I've been so impressed by what I've seen out of Ukraine and from those people. It's just sort of, if they don't inspire you to sit there and say something has to be done, I don't know what will. So, but we have channels on any kind of political situation you can think of, gaming, movies, and of course politics in the U.S., Roe v. Wade, Supreme Court. We do shows on all of that, and we will have plenty to cover soon, I'm sure, as the politics heats up in the U.S. and as Trump is likely to find himself under more and more indictments, probably pretty quickly. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you guys on Tuesday when we have Lieutenant General Benjamin Hodges on to discuss the Ukraine war, NATO's response, the future of NATO, Russia, and the U.S. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you then.